Hi, everyone. As you're connecting here, welcome. Happy Friday. Hello, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 764th New Social Environment. I'm Carolyn, a Programs Associate here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Matt Mullican and Dan Cameron. And we are thrilled to welcome poet Patrick Hill here to close today's program. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges Black Lives Matter and that here in New York, we are on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We recognize land acknowledgements are not a replacement for actual necessary decolonial work, but serve as a reminder of place, of the legacies of dispossession and enslavement that sustain and enrich the stolen land we are speaking from. And now to introduce today's guest and host. Matt Mullican is a contemporary artist best known for combining performance, drawing, painting, printmaking, sculpture, and video as a means of exploring the subjective through the intersection of communal signage and personal semiotics. A part of the Pictures generation alongside Jack Goldstein, Cindy Sherman, Sherrie Levine, and Richard Prince, Mullican decodes images and signs through diagrams, patterns, and written words. The artist has also been known to examine his own subconscious through hypnotism in his quest to understand patterns and how they may be broken. Mullican's works are in the collections of several renowned institutions. Our host today, New York-based curator, art writer, and educator Dan Cameron launched his career in 1982 with Extended Sensibilities at the New Museum, the first institutional effort in the US to examine gay and lesbian identity in art. For over 40 years, Cameron has held senior curatorial positions at the New Museum, Orange County Museum of Art, and CAC New Orleans, and organized more than 100 museum exhibitions, including surveys of Martin Wong, David Wojnarowicz, Faith Ringgold, and several others. Thank you all so much for being here, and I'm going to turn it over to you, Dan.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Carolyn. I hope everyone can hear me all okay. Yeah, I haven't done one of the new social environments in about a year, so I was really thrilled to get the call to talk to Matt Mullican today, in part because Matt is really one of the artists who I think I've followed the most closely over the years, and part of that has to do with the fact that when I was getting interested in his work, I reached out to him. This was about close to 40 years ago that we're talking now, and I was lucky to have some interview sessions with Matt at the end of the 80s. And we worked on an exhibition called Art in Its Double that was in Spain. And I really felt like there was a point where I could act as a spokesperson for what Matt was doing. And now, like, fast forward to 2023 and the incredible exhibition that's going on right now at Peter Friedman. And I feel like I'm kind of starting all over again, that I'm needing to interact. I'm needing more direct discourse with Matt so I can continue on the path of decoding and understanding, getting to the bottom of the iconography that's in his work. So Matt, thank you for being with us today. I wanted you to, if I could, to ask you to start by talking about two dates. One is the date that you've used for the exhibition, and the other is the date to which we're approaching the 50th anniversary. And I feel like these two dates are both very pivotal, and we could probably spend the whole hour talking about them. But just as a way of breaking the ice before we get to the images of the show, would you mind just shedding some light on the two dates that are significant to this body of work right now?
Well, the dates, the date, I think it's, what is it, August 10th, 1908? Is that it? I think that's the date. And that's the date of this comic. The entire show, the show itself, is based on a single page from a Little Nemo in Slumberland comic. Not a comic. They didn't have comic books really back then. This was in a newspaper, in the Herald Tribune, I think. And it was published all over the US, I think. I don't know. And this particular comic, 1908, is really representing the breaking down of the comic space. at the very beginning, the very first, and there are 12 chapters, and each one is a different painting in the exhibition. Well, the last chapter is one painting in two parts. And the first bit of the comic is basically Nemo is up in his bedroom, and Pip, his friend, is outside wanting to know what's up, and Nemo invites him in for breakfast. And so the next shot is that Nemo's mother is giving them porridge, a new kind of porridge that would make them fat. That's the whole point, is to gain weight, as if that was a good thing, because of course it's a different era. This is 1908. And so they start to eat it. And the next square is that they both comment that they're getting bigger, that Nemo and Pip are both getting fatter. And as they get fatter, the next one is that and also the chairs start to break. But all of the geometry of the dining room where they're eating is, it's very linear. It's very geometric. Everything is in this place. The two bowls are in the same spot. There are two pictures on the wall. There's a kind of the background has just this wallpaper, very linear. Everything's geometric. And then at one point, they chairs break, and the next one, they fall into the floor itself. And the next one, they're falling into the room below, which is the living room. So finally, all of the stuff that's been in the first four panels is starting to disappear. And now they're in free fall, and all the objects from the dining room and the objects from the living room are intermixed in free fall. So they're all crashing around. So everything is becoming very abstract. So all the geometry and the linearity has been destroyed. It's been deconstructed. And so then they're in the living room, falling through it, and then they crash down through the bottom of the living room into the basement. And then they're in the basement. So then there's coal, and their boiler is down there, and all these other materials. So now you have the dining room stuff, the living room stuff, and the basement stuff all floating in the sky. I mean, in the picture, because it's all falling. Everything is falling, and then they fall into a hole in the basement, into the ground, and they're going into the earth. So they're being swallowed up by the earth, and you just see their feet sticking out as they're going into the earth. And then the last pattern is the mother who had given them this porridge, looking at them at the house, which is now just it's just in pieces. The whole house is gone. And she says, so what are those boys up to? And then as she is saying this, little Nemo falls out of his real bed. And he is now falling out of the bed. And that's in a way, but this is real world. This whole story was in his dream. So when he wakes up in the dream, at the very first panel, it's the same context, except that that's a dream space, and the last panel is the real space. Now, this was done in 1908. So the deconstruction of the picture plane is really along the same year as Cubism, the beginning of Cubism. Very pivotal year. Lots of stuff is being challenged, and the world is changing at this point. So this is like a deconstruction of the picture plane and of the narrative. The narrative ceases to exist when they're falling. And then also, as a child, one of my vivid dreams was falling in a dream, falling out of an airplane. I remember falling out of an airplane and always thinking about what it would feel like to hit the ground, but having the vertigo when I was falling. And that's what I was interested in, those kind of feelings that you have in dreams. This imaginary universe, which has been in my work from 1973. So what happened? The second date is what happened fit. And this is a coincidence, but this show will be up at the 50th anniversary of this idea that I had, which was details from an imaginary universe, where talking about pictures and this whole idea that a picture is a real place. And then that comes with something else altogether, which has to do with light patterns, which is the thing that I'm not mentioning so far was the fact that I changed the color of everything inside this comic. All the colors have been changed. So and they change from picture to picture. So he's wearing blue in one and green in the other, and he has a red face in one and he has a green face in the other. So they keep on switching. The whole thing is very kaleidoscopic.
And each picture, if I can interrupt, each picture is actually two pictures side by side. There's the original.
Yeah, there's a picture
on the left,
which is the whole comic, and then the picture on the right are details of that comic in circular details, which are in the exact same spot, because all of these pieces are rubbings. That means that every painting that you see is a rubbing in itself. So those are the drawings. Great. And then you have the paintings themselves are rubbing, frottage. It's the first form of reproducible media. And I've been working with that since the early 80s. And I've been, at the opening, it was kind of wonderful, but most everybody didn't know how things were made. And so I was explaining the process of how these pictures were made, the fact that I made a relief and then I did this and I did this, and no one seemed to get how they were made. They were very confused by it. And truly, the first time I showed these pictures, this kind of picture was in 1984. So it's been a while since.
So you've been making rubbings for 40 years, but it's the first time people have said, Matt,
a little less.
How do you make these?
See, there you go. I mean, these particular ones are where the process is. We have the Little Nemo comic, then it's projected on a piece of masonite, of say a 4x8 sheet of masonite, or a 2x2 meter sheet of masonite.
Got it.
And then it's drawn on there, and then it's cut with a knife. You cut into the board, and when you cut into the board, the material has to go somewhere and it comes up. So it creates a little bit of a ridge. And that's enough. So when you put a canvas over that and you rub it like you would a coin or a gravestone, the image comes up as a black line. So there's a black line that's in every single, surrounding every image.
And after that, it's colored in. Each individual color is added.
Yeah. What happens is that I do the first rubbing is done with a carbon pencil, like a pencil. It's not a pencil, it's a flat little brick of carbon, very light. And I put it on, and that just gets the image onto the canvas. So then they see this whole thing on the canvas, and I did a drawing of where I want all the colors to be. And then, so they did that. Then they put the canvas on, the canvas is on the relief. It stays on the relief the entire time. And then they paint in with masking tape. They paint all the colors in. This takes about, a week to 10 days to paint all the colors in with masking tape. And then once that's all done, then we rub on top of that with a paint stick, oil paint, and you just rub it very gently, and then the black comes through, and then that's how it's done. Now, the part that confuses people is the first part that I did with the carbon. They don't understand that.
But cutting and then the carbon.
The carbon is the first, and then I do the paint stick. The paint stick's at the end. And there is a kind of what happens is that when you do the rubbing, it also rubs up the texture of the canvas. So the knots in the canvas come up. So the surface is a very particular surface that comes up. This is the first form of reproducible media. It goes back several thousand years to China. and it's a Chinese system originally. And so this is just as it's a positive print. It's not a negative print. It's a positive print. So of course it was Max Ernst most famously used frottage in his own work, but that's not the reference that is so interesting for me. I'm interested in the fact that there's it goes back that far, the first form of reproducible media. And then also at the same time that I was doing that, in the 80s, I started working with computerized media, which is the latest form, digital media. Mm-hmm. I did virtual reality environments in the early 90s. So this was all about that's in relationship to the show. So back in 1973, what I did was I created an imaginary, a fictional studio where I worked myself. I worked in it, and this was in 73. And I invented a character, and I named that character Glenn. It was a stick figure, and he basically did experiments in that studio. And I was in John Baldessari's class called Post-Studio Art. And I never had a studio because I was an undergrad when I was at Cal Arts. So I never got a studio at school, but this was my studio in any case. My studio existed in a fictional plane. And this is 50 years since that studio was created. And since Glenn was investigating the nature of his own reality. Where was he? Where what's happening around him? So when Glenn is listening, to someone next door, who is that person next door to Glenn? Or what's going on there? In 1973, I entered a picture as a performance at Project Ink in Boston. And the person, Paul McMahon, who had this print, it was out of a book of a Piranesi print, and I projected my mind's eye into the print and simply walked in and started to describe to the audience what I was seeing. I wanted to get to actually not worry about the form of the picture, but the subject of the picture, independent of that form, if that was possible.
And were you doing this in a form of self-hypnosis, or did you?
It is a form of trance. It's not formally hypnosis because I didn't have a hypnotist. I did it on my own, and but it is like that, and it's something that whenever we go to the movies, we do it ourselves. It's like when you start to go into the movies and you can hear people eating the popcorn around you. You're very aware of where you're sitting, and then within minutes, you don't hear them eating the popcorn anymore. You're in the picture. So that is something that I was very much interested in. And that when you see pictures, when you see a painting of somebody or a photograph of somebody that you recognize, that you see them, and someone can ask you, so who is that? And then you can say, oh, that is so-and-so. But that person is not there. That person is not there at all. He's there or she is there, but they are there and they are not there. And that is something that I'm very much interested in. I'm interested in the subject in relationship to the sign. And this is all stuff that was coming up in the 70s very quickly. A lot of my work, most of my ideas were born between 73 and 76. That I'm still working with. And in 77, 78, flags and so forth came in. So that even was the beginning of all that other stuff.
Well, I think you set off on a very fruitful journey in the sense that you tapped into something like with the stick figure or with the rubbings where you can say there's a pre-civilized or Neolithic idea about symbology and how human beings at the beginning of civilization or forming groups, formed these realities, these pictures that were actually things that they needed to invest their belief in. And I think that from the beginning, you've tried to tap into something that's very universal, but which people often confuse with, another level of symbology, which is art objects and, images sort of understood within a context of other images. And you're less interested in that. You're much more interested in the meanings behind the images and what they evoke, including in the subconscious.
Yeah. Well, when I was a kid at the age of 7 or 6 or whatever, I remember the teacher telling me and telling us this in the class in the first or second or third grade, that underneath everything there is a word. So in the bed, there is the word bed. In the chair, there is the word chair, and that is what's there. And I somehow didn't believe them. I thought that no, there's another thing that's there that's underneath the bed that is not a word, but it's there as well. And that is something that I'm investigating. And that leads straight into what do I think in? When I'm thinking, if I'm processing information, how do I process information? There's this woman, Temple Grandin Smith, who says that she thinks in pictures, and that she knows, and that her assumption is that most people think in words. Now, I know that I do not think in words. I know this for sure. I don't think in words, and I don't even think I don't think in pictures either. So if I don't think in words and I don't think in pictures, what do I think in? And as far as I can tell, and then there's no way of somehow coming up with the right info. It's all become poetry at this point.
Sure.
Is that I think in feelings. Now, I think when we have an idea and we know it's right, it's a feeling that we have. Like a mathematician, when he's trying or she's trying to figure out a problem, to solve a problem, at one point in the theorem, they have a feeling, oh, this is not right. And then they have to go backtrack and they go through the whole thing, and then they see their problem and then they can fix it. But that whole process is involving feelings.
Do you mean feelings like an instinct or a hunch, or feelings as an emotion, or both?
Yeah, feelings as in all of those. I think it's a feeling of how it's like when we see an object or a place, that we have a relationship to that object or place. There is that relationship, that personality, that thing, whatever it is we know what it feels like. And that when we're thinking, I think when we are processing information, we process information at a very high level, high speed, which are those feelings that are almost divorced from the object representing them.
It's a form of knowledge.
Very fast.
It's a form of very real knowledge, but it comes in the form of
knowledge. Yes,
sensation.
Yes, it's a form of knowledge. It's a form of knowledge. Why not? Why not? Whatever knowledge is. I mean, that's the fun thing about being an artist, is that you have these these very simple questions about what's going on, what am I doing, and why am I doing it? And they're very simple questions, but they can have super complex answers, but they're very basic. I remember, the one reason I went to signs rather than, I went to the signs of things because it was almost a different part of the brain that understood the sign than that something that understood it phonetically, or the word. A sign seemed to be faster than a word, seemed to be.
Like a
Not
shortcut.
that it necessarily is, but it seemed to be faster. And then when I went to Europe for the first time, this was in the early 80s, I was just taking photographs of all the signs everywhere, and all the train stations and the bus stations and the airports and in the cities and everything else. And that was fun, because those are all they're most of them are quantitative, and they're also informative. They tell you where things are. They're not really expressing a feeling so much, although they are expressing a feeling, but they're not. The intent is not to do that. The intent is to make life easier, so you know where to go. what to do. And in the 80s, when I was making all this stuff with signs, people were understanding my work in relationship to Egypt and or Mexico
Yeah,
or
why
China,
not?
all of
Glyphs.
those cultures that is somehow there. But that wasn't what I was after. I mean, of course, it pertains to all of that, but I was interested in interface design. I was interested in, so how do I communicate to you what my intentions are, and how does the picture work, and how does it function? And that's what I was interested in. There was a woman that came up to me at a party I don't know, say 15 years ago. And she said that she had bought a TV set and that she understood my work. She said, I understood your work. You're from the 80s. You showed with Mary Boone, and I saw some of your shows and so forth. And then she got
So
this
she's got
TV.
you.
She got this TV and she turned it on, and it was a field of icons on the TV. And then she said, oh, looks like Matt Mullican's work. There's all these icons are there. And then she understood what my work was about, 15 years, 20 years earlier. Because when I was doing all this stuff back in the 70s, there was no personal computers. There was no internet. There was no phones like this. There was nothing. None of this stuff existed. I mean, of course it existed in the academic context, and it existed in signs as it is architecturally speaking, but it did not exist in our daily lives where it's turned into this whole thing. And it was just a surprise that and so what was I representing back in the 70s? It was a zeitgeist, you could say, a feeling of something. It comes out of TV. My generation, we are, talking with Robert Longo, it's about television. Is where, that was the stuff that we're reacting to. That's our generation, versus the generation from the 50s.
And I'm interested in how, now in the year 2023, you're actually cycling back to the year 1908. And, if we imagine that, it's Sunday morning and we've gotten, our New York Herald Tribune, and we open it up and we see the Little Nemo comic. I mean, from where we stand now, we can say, well, obviously this is a harbinger of, the chaos and confusion, not just of, cubism and all these modern movements, dissonance in symphonic music, but also the Great War, which was right around the corner.
Right.
And so here we are in 2023, seeing this almost subliminal message or warning or some kind of message seeping out through the Little Nemo comic and letting us know, long after the fact, that some of these things were predictable. And so I guess to make it into a question, how is it that this particular comic became emblematic of something that you were interested in exploring and investigating? It's
the abstraction of it. It's this breaking down. I mean, you said about what's behind things. What's behind the picture, and if I go into the picture and I'm having these feelings, where am I? Who is that person? What's going on here? So in a way they answer that. But it's the architecture of how this whole system, this field of vision, this place is breaking down in front of us, turning into this abstraction, this who knows what it's turning into. But it's doing what all things do, which is they all change and they all break down to their parts eventually. I went to a show of William Wegman last night. He had an opening, and at Magenta Plains. It's a wonderful show. And I walked in.
He's a wonderful artist.
A wonderful artist. And he had these paintings, and they're all paintings of destroyed houses. Now, this was such a shock. It looks like my last panel, which is the destroyed house, is coming, it's looking just like his work. So I said, what are we responding to? I mean, I talked to him, I said, why did you come up with this? And he says he's been working with this material for a long time. It could have been 30 years, I don't know. But this whole, it was just such a strange point to see that, what does this have to do with contemporary life? But things have been thrown on its head. The world's on its head now. We're upside down. Everything is being turned topsy-turvy. And so
and we're not ready for it.
Well, maybe, we're there. I mean, it's happening, whatever. And it's just part of it. So that was maybe that was something I was attracted to. An artist in relationship to this particular show and these particular pieces. One of the first artists that I was thinking of was Alighieri Boetti's Everything, which is it's a field that everything is it's a field of pictures where they all share borders. It's a fantastic group of work, Alighieri Boetti. And then when I was making these pictures, in comes Kandinsky. This kind of everything is just being blown apart, and then of course Cubism. And then when I was putting up the show, putting up the work, and then I just thought of Sol LeWitt. Hey, this looks like Sol LeWitt's work. I mean,
the grid.
So there's so many references that seem to be popping in and popping out. I mean, as an artist, that's something that you do, is that you're always looking to see how your work, who your work owes their idea to. Where does that come from? And so in a sense, that's what I'm talking about for myself in putting up the show. But that kind of destructo thing that's happening. Now, the reason with the color, and this is an important point in the work, in 72 and 73, I had this idea that, and I still have this idea, that all I see are light patterns. So when I'm looking at anybody or anything, and that's important, anybody is a living being and anything is an object, it's all light. It's all, when I'm saying everything I see is a light pattern, I am disengaged from it. It becomes an apparition, an hallucination.
And that includes other representations of things, not just things,
but includes everything.
The world of
everything,
all possible manifestations of the visual.
Everything, from when I wake up in the morning to when I have breakfast, to when I'm walking down the street, when I run into whoever I'm running into, where I'm talking to you, when I'm performing in front of an audience. There's a distance in that word. Now, Jack Goldstein, as it was mentioned, he said it's all about distance. That was something that he used to talk about, was the distance of the object, the distance of the picture, so forth. And so, in a degree, that statement is really of that era, except it's a bit early, because and then the question is, if all I see are light patterns, then where does life fit into those patterns? And then you get into something else altogether. Then you can jump into, say, Philip Guston, as an odd one to say, but I reading books about him, and that he was giving a lecture about painting, and he and someone else were talking about painting on a stage. And this must have been in the late 60s, early 70s, but I think it's the late 60s. And the person he was talking with said, a painting is so much paint on so much canvas, and that's all a painting is. And he said, that's ridiculous. A painting, it doesn't exist in the same plane that we do. It's a different thing. It's a different universe. He said, a painting is in the mind. Painting is in the mind. It doesn't exist on the panel. It doesn't exist on the canvas. It exists in its form, but that's not what's good about it. Everything, there's form in everything, but what makes a painting different, what makes a picture different, is that it represents something other than what it is. So when I see a picture of my mother, My mother is there and she is not there. My mother is not there. Really not physically, she's not there. And yet I can tell you how old she is in that particular picture that I'm looking at. The decoding is so spontaneous, is so fast that I'm there. So when I'm talking to my mom and she's in Los Angeles and I'm in Berlin, Germany, and I'm talking to her, I hear her voice and I'm talking to her, and yet all the sounds that I'm hearing are emanating from the phone, which is less than an inch away from my ear. That's where the sounds are coming from. But there she is. We are in a different universe. We're in a different, so I'm dealing with my mother in a virtual way, but pictures are virtual in that sense. Pictures, when you see a picture of anybody. And so what my work is all about, generally speaking, I'm trying to understand, okay, it's there and it's not there. And so I'm interested in the architecture of how those things coexist.
Well,
And
I think, I sorry to interrupt, but I think that we've got some additional images that are not exactly from the show that kind of help frame some of the things that you've been talking about.
Oh yeah, here, see,
now.
April 12th, the show is still up, April 12th. That I dated the time that I got this idea. And this is this imaginary studio. I got a good piece. This was an idea that I had. And so he has the time on the wall. He has a table and a picture on the wall, and he's sitting down and he's thinking, I've got a good piece, which is, I have a good idea. I have a good idea. I knew I was trying to understand where, what to do, where can I go? This was at Cal Arts. This was, I'd been at Cal Arts for 2 years. This is after conceptual art. And I needed to, we were all, my friends and I, trying to figure out what could we do after conceptual art? Where could we go, in a sense? Because, Lawrence Weiner said that the piece did not have to be fabricated. So then, okay, so the piece is, the piece has disappeared. And so in the reductivist, theory of things, where do we go after that? What happens after, the piece doesn't exist? It's disappeared, now it's gone. And so we're coming along, and what's next? What happens next? I have no idea, but that's what we were looking for.
But you could occupy the imaginary, which you did.
That's what I did. I went,
into the space that wasn't there.
Yeah, the formalist view of things is the form, which is the Carl Andre and Donald Judd and all that stuff, all those people, all those artists. And conceptual art is formalist in the sense that most of it is formalist because it's dealing with the form of content, as in language. And what I was interested in was not that per se. I was interested in the feeling of living within that language, that place. And so I was trying to prove that stick figures live lives. I was interested in the pain that Glenn felt when he put a pin into his finger. When he stuck a pin in his finger, he felt pain. So here you have this, here are the light patterns. All I see are light patterns where I put color aid cards on a wall, and then I shine different lights on them so they all changed. And this is really where the colors in the comic book come from. When I'm changing the colors on Little Nemo, that's what I'm paying attention to. So it becomes almost hallucinatory. The people at the opening came up to me, and the adjective that I heard more than anything was trippy, that my paintings were trippy or psychedelic or something along those lines. And to a degree, that's true, because what I'm doing is that the picture playing is psychological. Pictures are of the mind, as Philip Guston said. And he was quoting Leonardo da Vinci saying that paintings are of the mind. Pictures and paintings are of the mind. So of course it is going to end up being psychedelic. It's just got to be, because that's what it is. It is of the mind. And
Well,
so, yeah.
sorry, but you were one of the first artists, I think, to naturally move towards the idea of the virtual,
Virtual reality. Yeah,
yeah.
well, I entered the picture in 1973. I walked around it in front of an audience. In 1986, after I was doing rubbings and I was representing cities that exist in these 5 worlds of my work. I have 5 worlds that my work exists in. I got a phone call in California from a company called Digital Productions. And they said, because they had seen my exhibition and I had a big cityscape in my show, and they asked me, how would I like to walk inside my city? They actually asked, that's how the conversation started.
They knew who they were talking to.
They knew who they were talking to. It was amazing. And so I said, absolutely. So within a week, I was there in their place, and they had a Cray supercomputer, and we were creating a landscape that one could walk into. And then that was in 1986. And then that became this exhibition that I had at MoMA, a MoMA Projects exhibition, all with digital information. And at MoMA, the thing about it is, it was so expensive to produce this project. It was a ridiculous amount of money back then, because they had to use these very, very fancy computers that cost a ton to do. And in fact, for that project, the software was being produced as we went along. It was all being created as we went along.
There was no beta version. It just,
there was
use it.
We were Connections Machine 2, Thinking Machines Connections Machine 2 was the machine we were using. And so MoMA, talking to the people at the museum, I wanted to make sure that they would give credit to 9X. Remember, the phone company, they put money into the show, and I needed to have them to make sure that they were going to be giving tribute. I mean, to at least explain that 9X had given us a lot of money to do this project. And the woman at MoMA said, look, we understand that they're going to do that, but the one information that we don't have and which we have to get is who took the photographs. They wanted to know who took the pictures that are in your pictures. I mean, we know that they were photographed by somebody, because they've always been photographed by somebody. And I said, no, there is no photographer.
There's no
So what do you mean there's no photographer? There's always a photographer. I said, no, I took these pictures in the digital space. I was in that virtual space and I was taking the pictures there. And that's the process. That's part of the project. They said, oh, we understand that, but who took the picture of the picture? I said, no one took the picture of the picture. It doesn't exist. And so this was the first time that they had this problem, which all digital work has. But you know, you don't ask them who took the picture when you're showing a film. What do you say? I mean, that's another part, you know, so they have a huge there's a whole film department, and they wouldn't ask the director who took the picture. But in the art part of the museum, this was a first. And I got the worst review of my life. One of the worst reviews was for that show. That show at MoMA was a terrible, terrible review. The reviewer barely touched on the fact that it was all digital. That didn't seem to be interesting for the reviewer.
What was the criticism?
Mostly they were talking about architecture. The fact that my architecture is not architect. I'm not an architect. I represent architecture within my work. And I actually represent it to the extent of where I can walk around in it. But
here's a walk around image right here. I remember this.
Oh yeah, here, this is, oh yeah, no, I'm not looking at the screen. Yeah, that's at the Haus der Kunst in Munich. And you have the flags are from a show that I did at the National Gallery in Berlin. They were made for that Mies van der Rohe building. And then you have the rubbings are on the side walls. And then these models, the MIT project. So they're all levels of representation that you can go into. Some of them you can walk into, and then others you can see from great distances. Those flags are quite large, you can imagine. And,
do you have any interest in in kind of dealing with more augmented reality or virtual reality systems now, or is it sort of something that's a little too formalized at this point?
No, I'm interested in it. Totally. I did a project with, where I was interested in just the representation of space, of virtual space. I did the virtual reality with the French Ministry of Culture. We had to make it a certain size because if you flew off into the digital realm, you could go on forever. And so I was interested in just the fact that you could do that, that you could go off forever inside that digital space. And so I created this project where I'm just representing the solar system. The solar system was represented. So it would take you many days to actually travel at a very high rate of speed to go from one planet to another. Within that digital space. So that's something, for instance, a more recent project that I've done with the virtual space. But again, that's not so far away from the hypnosis. And that's a project that started in my first performance with hypnosis, goes back to the 70s, like 77. I think the first performance I did with hypnosis was in 77 with the hypnotist. And that is an ongoing project for me, because all rules and go out the window with that project. My work is I have a very pretty tight architecture in my art.
Well, I think that your inclusion in Lynn Cook's important exhibition of what used to be called outsider art
Yes,
had a lot to do with that, because as you explained to me, that wasn't by you, that was by Glenn,
with
by
that
the other
person.
guy, with that
Well, that person is the individual that I become. And I have a whole bunch of theories about who that person is, but we'll just say that person is who I am when I'm in that trance state.
Got it.
And that person has no sex. It has no sex and no age. It's a man, woman, old, young,
Child, person.
kind of whoever. And I remember I did this performance at the Kitchen Center, and this was in 1982. And I come out on stage and I actually say that to the audience, that I'm not a man, I'm not a woman, I have no age. And that's how that started. So that person is very particular. Whenever we see a picture of anybody, there's a part of that person that we project into that person, into the person
Sure.
We're looking in the picture. That projection is as close to who I become in the trance state. So that person is that projection, separated, and he or she, and basically she can be broken down into my mother and my father, the two of them, both those people, and that is and that she seems to have a real problem when it comes to just functioning in a normal sense. So people think that that I, as a performer, am autistic or schizophrenic or have Tourette's, or I'm very impulsive. I'm acting in a very strange way. And I've had doctors come up to me after seeing some of these videos of my performances, and they wanted to know, where did I study patients that look and act this way? And I said, it's in me. It's not something that I'm studying to become. It is innate behavior. It is innate. It is who I am. And I do think that it's in everybody. I think we all have that in us, and we keep a lid on it. And as an artist, that's what we want to do as artists, is take the lid off of those places in order to, just to, in a way, articulate the way the world works, could work or could not work.
Now, Matt, is there any relationship between the guy in
That person,
and
not that guy,
Glenn,
that person,
and Glenn, who is an imaginary artist
Glenn
occupying an imaginary space?
Yeah, the difference is the fact that I am that person and Glenn is someone else. So Glenn is viewed from the outside. So I see Glenn in the room and he is pricking his finger, or he is peeing in a corner, or he is trying to figure out, to remember. Glenn is remembering the time he hurt himself skiing. Whereas that person, I am that person. It's first person. And I don't know where I am. I don't see where I am. I don't see what I want to do. It's an experience which has no gaps. Whereas with Glenn, there's a distance. I think that person, the gift of that person is that all space has collapsed, and that my work is highly systematic. I have 5 worlds, 5 specific worlds. Each world has a different color, and they can be applied to many different contexts and different architectures. But that person has none of it. That person is different. That person has no gaps, no planal view for him.
I think it's telling that you say their world has collapsed. And in fact, that's what's happening to Little Nemo.
Yes,
in the comic book, that
this
his
is
collapsed all around him.
Isn't that something? That's true. That is absolutely true. I hadn't thought of it. The Little Nemo thing is I still don't know what's going on there. I decided to do this picture. I was offered the exhibition. Peter said, let's do another show. Peter Freeman, and I was very happy to do another show, and it's a beautiful gallery space on Grand Street.
Fantastic.
Wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
1880s, 1890s. Oh, it's an old department store. Fantastic. And in any case, I was and every time as an artist, when you do a show in a particular space, I want to challenge the parameters of how I am seen. And I wanted to this because most of my exhibitions have been very different kinds of work. So you'd have, like the last show I had there, I had a big flag, and then I had objects, I had scientific objects, I had photographs, I had all these different mediums. And I wanted to do a show where I only had one medium. And so then this was the show. And then I had this idea to do this Little Nemo comic and to change all the colors. And it was a fantasy of sorts. And then I was talking to him. I said, maybe this should be my exhibition. And he was very enthusiastic to do it. And why not? So we went with it. And it was a huge effort. This particular show was probably the most physically demanding, ambitious, formally speaking, ambitious show that I've done in a long time. Many, 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 many years. I haven't done something with this much detail and this much work because it took forever. It was a huge undertaking. And when I'm putting up the work, I still don't, and the response has been interesting. It's been good, this kind of trippy, psychedelic, whatever, all of this stuff. And it was a surprise for people. People were surprised by this work.
I was completely surprised by it.
Yeah,
I walked in and the first feeling I had was, what did I miss? What was the transitional work that I didn't get to see because I was
in between,
out of town or something?
What's happened in between in the last 30 years or 20 years or whatever, but artists, and as you know, I'm 71. which is not, I mean, today, in today's world, it's not, I'm not that old, but
You're
I'm older than I
middle-aged.
was.
Right.
So, and the thing is that as we get older, it's fun to push things around a little bit. And as an artist, I think that is one of the best things an artist can do. I mean, that's what I think, is to push things around and to take. I had no idea what, and I still don't know what really about the work, what it's about, but it does. Your comment about the relationship between Nemo and how I'm describing that person, they are very close. This body of work is very close to the hypnotic, to the hypnosis.
Well,
Very
sometimes you
close.
can't see the work until you make it. And I think this is one of those.
That's why people make it, right?
That's
Yeah.
it. But look, we are coming up on question and answer time, Matt. I don't think we're
Really?
premature
Wow.
at all. I know the first hour zipped by. I mean, we're actually a couple minutes premature. So if no one pipes up with a question immediately, I certainly have a backlog of questions
please.
that I can use. But let's
Yes.
see. Having said that, let's see if anyone comes up and says, I want to know X, Y, and Z. Because I actually had people reach out to me in the last couple of days saying they had questions that they wanted to bring to today's event.
Okay.
Oh, good. Yeah, I do hope if anybody has a question, feel free to put it in the chat, or you can use the raise your hand function on Zoom, or just raise your hand in the video. But while we sort of let people gather those, do you want to ask one more yourself, Dan? And
I do. I wanted to actually, if you could describe, because you mentioned the 5 worlds, Matt.
Yes.
And I think
it's crucial.
That was super helpful for me when you first went through it, but it's been a while, so maybe you could walk me through it again.
Yeah, the 5 worlds. I will start at the bottom, which is the elements. It's materiality. If you can say that an object can have no meaning at all, object without meaning, that would be the green area. Elements is the elemental. So that would be just the physicality, the physical. And then one step above that is what I call the real world. And the real world is the street, is the house. It's when we're not thinking about anything, we're just living our lives. And that would be, you know, walking in the park, going to the restaurant, whatever, all the real world stuff. And then the next world up is the world framed. And that would be the arts. That's the theater, that's the picture, that's the you know, all of those framed, so that when you take anything out of the real world and you put a frame around it, so you're no longer living with it, but you're looking at it as a sign. It's beginning to be a sign. And that would be the world framed. So that's in the center, that's in the middle. And then above that, you have language, sign, and that would be in black and white. So the bottom is green, the world is blue, the world framed is yellow, and now we're in black and white, which is sign, which is where it's very related to the sign of that exists inside the world frame, but it's been abstracted. It's no longer necessarily physically real. It could be in your head. It could be, it doesn't have to, it could be, the signs can be in any context, in any way. And that would be black and white. And then on the top is the red, is the subject. And the subject is really having to do with the feeling of the sign. It's the relationship to that sign. So in a sense, the red is the meaning. So that would be meaning without physicality. If meaning can exist without any physical armature whatsoever, that would be in the red. If the physical armature could exist without any meaning, that would be the elements, that would be the green. So at one end is subject without meaning, the other end is object without subject. So, I mean, subject without material and object without subject. So those are the two bookends. And those are my 5 worlds, and they've been in my work since the 70s, formalized in 81, 82. And the color, and I've been using those colors since then. I mean, those colors. So that is kind of like a like the color of those worlds. And it exists in stained glass, in carpet, in ceramics, in architecture, in you know, name it. I've tried to play it that way. And that's and then in the then there's, I even touched on the cosmology, which is heaven and God and hell and demons and angels and all of that other stuff. That's a huge amount of my work that exists in the red area, in the subject.
In the subject.
Yeah, but that's a big part of, we haven't even talked about any of that yet, because I represent, in my work, I represent God. I represent hell. I represent demons and angels before birth and after death. All these questions that really come out as they're almost childlike, and it's a deity, but it's almost childlike in the way it asks the questions. So where was I before I was born? Asking my parents, because there was a photograph of them without me there, and I said, so where was I? I asked them that when I was 5, 6 years old. So those are questions kids ask. So to a large extent, my cosmology is very, it is almost, it's very simple-minded. It's a very simple-minded cosmology, but it does answer those questions of where was I before I was born? Why did things happen the way they do while I live my life? And where do I go after I die? So they address those questions. And those are the questions that go back to the Neolithic period. Those questions have to do with our future, our past, and fate, and what's going on. And those questions are in all cultures. They exist in all cultures. It doesn't matter. They go back. And yet, and I'm addressing those. I'm trying to address those questions in my work. I'm trying to understand how art functions. What is art anyway? And art and art beyond the art world, you could say. I mean, all artists, regardless of who they are, should be addressing, I think, at least the larger picture of the circumstance of art making.
I think we have a question. Do we not?
Let's see. We got one. I saw Michaela with your hand raised. If you're still here, you should be able to unmute.
Yes, hi, that was wonderful.
Great.
I guess that's why you are male and female and young and old. Temple Grandin says that blind and deaf people have heightened instincts, intuitions, and perceptions. Do you also feel like Grandin that your signs emerged in common with blind and deaf people's heightened instincts?
Oh my God. Blind and deaf people. I mean, the thing is that how do we know what that feels like? I mean,
she talks about that.
I know, but being blind is an experience that if you're not blind, it's very difficult to somehow figure that one out.
My father was blind. My father was blind, so.
But yeah, well, then for him to say, or you have a better experience than I do, because my father is not was. But you know, there's a friend of mine who had a stroke. And there's a part in their field of vision where they can't see. They can't see. And so they can't drive a car anymore because they have it's not a big part of that, but they can't see. And the thing about it, so I asked him, so what's in that place that you cannot see? Is it black? Is it white? Is it gray? What color is it? What is it? And he says, there's nothing there. I said, what do you mean there's nothing there? I mean, he said, doesn't exist. There's nothing there. You cannot say it's black, you cannot say it's white, it's simply not there. So it's as if, behind my head right now, what does it look like back there? I have no idea. I'm blind to my hands behind my head, but how does that look? I can't see it. So it's like that. So, so maybe that has to do with blindness, I suppose, or deafness. But yeah, I would say probably, of course, they have a heightened relationship to their environment through their other senses. That would make sense to me. That would make sense to me.
Great. Thank
Hello?
you so
Okay.
much, Michaela, for that question. And thank you, Matt.
It's a good question, a very difficult question to answer, but it's a good question.
Yeah. So let's see, unless anybody else raises their hand here last minute, Lynn, okay, go for it here. You should be able to unmute.
Thank you. I loved this conversation so much, and I loved your work. I've never seen it in person, but I just have a very broad question because it's a lot to take in. And I was thinking, I wondered if your work is almost a balance between control and uncontrol and lack of control, and sort of an exploration of what you can in fact construct and what you really have no power over once you've constructed something.
Yeah, well, back and forth. I mean, that person is really this uncontrollable thing. I mean, that's such a bit. And how the creative process is, in general, I think has to do with this intuitive process of creating something from nothing or changing the rules or whatever. There's a lot of, we know what we're doing, but we don't know what we're doing. We're kind of in the dark. And in a sense, that is and that's with everything. That's from like when you're cooking, you're in the kitchen and you're cooking, and then you start and you're following recipes, and then you say, oh, fuck it, I'm gonna just, I think I should do this. And you can't really break, you just think that would be the better thing to go. And then you improve on the recipe because you don't know, you take a chance and you lose control. I think in order to, in a sense, articulate the possibilities, one has to extend, to take out the control element, as you mentioned, to get out of that place. I think that would be an important part. But it is like being in the kitchen and you just intuitively say, gosh, I'd like to try this out and see how it goes, how it happens. But as an artist, I mean, it's a much longer process. As I said, 50 years now. And, and there are points in my life when I feel that I've had that I push things to an extent just to see how things would change. Mm-hmm. Like I did with this exhibition. This was a new kind of thing for me. So that's an impulse that I think most artists can identify with. I mean, that's what we should be doing as artists. I mean, I think.
Pushing towards change.
Yes, pushing toward whatever that means. I mean, change can look like its opposite. To change something could seem like there are all these parameters that are very difficult to follow. You just have to go through the experience of it, the experience of seeing cause and effect, how it functions in the brain, in the psyche. The psyche is such a powerful thing. We and also poetry. Poetry is something I don't understand. Poetry personally, I don't understand many of the arts. I don't understand, And it's, but poetry, I'm a fan at this point, because our era right now, things have become so literal. Everything means something. Everything has to mean something. The iPhone wants to be dealt with in a very particular way. You know, we push this button to do that. We push that button to do this. But poetry is not literal. There's so much freedom in it, and yet I don't understand it. But I'm attracted to the. I will support it because of that. For starters, that's enough to support right there. But yeah, okay.
Thank
Sorry.
you. Oh, it was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Let's see. I guess we have one more from Eleanor. Did you want to go ahead?
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you, Carolyn. And thank you so much, Matt and Dan, for this great conversation. Matt, you use so many different mediums, such a huge variety of mediums in your work, which is so incredible. And I was wondering if you have like kind of a favorite or kind of one that you often return to, feels the most comfortable.
Drawing. I mean, you know, articulating ideas through drawing. That's what I've been doing my whole life. From when I was, both my parents were artists when I was growing up. My mother has recently become super famous at the age of 95 years old. My father was a painter. He just had a show at James Cohen in New York City, Lee Mullican. So I grew up in an artist household. And I was drawing since, boy, as all children do. You do that, and you continue to do it. Also, to talk, to tell stories, that kind of narrative of like what I'm doing now today is somehow to articulate my world that way. So I'd say those are this kind of the talking bit, and then the drawing bit, which has to do with articulating the landscape of where my work is, whatever that means.
Mhm.
I think those are the two that I would say I use the most. My notebooks are all words and drawings, pictures and words.
Thank you.
And my notebooks are, all my notebooks going back to I was in high school, even really terrible notebooks, are in the archives of American art. I've given them all my entire archive has gone to them. That's part of the Smithsonian.
That's
and
wonderful.
You can go through, you know, thousands and thousands of pages of them, all my notebooks going back to the 60s. They're there. So that's just for information for anybody. That's all.
Thank you so much.
Great. Yeah. Thank you, Eleanor. Thank you all for your questions today. It's been an amazing conversation. Here at the Rail, we have a tradition of ending our events with a poetry reading, which is fitting for the conversation. And I'm so thrilled to welcome Patrick Hill here today. Patrick Hill is a 23-year-old poet, multimedia artist, and production assistant at the Brooklyn Rail. A graduate of Pratt Institute's BFA writing program, his work has spanned digital and physical mediums, including narrative PowerPoints, web games, bootleg graphic t-shirts, and more. Known by some and feared by others for his rapid output and extreme do-it-yourself ethos, he lives and works in Brooklyn, New York, with his partner, unless something terrible has happened. Thank you, Patrick. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. And thank you so much, Dan and Matt. Matt, incredible show. Dan, incredible guidance of the conversation. Unreal. Really pleased to be here. So I was going to read some other stuff, but then the conversation sort of unfolded. And I have this one poem that I've read before that if you've heard me read, I've read a million times. And it's from like 2 years ago now. It's called Autumn. So I'm going to read that. Autumn. And I couldn't even muster up what I'd possibly say in the event of you, spotlit on blue. A beam arches out of Broadway, and separate eternities within ourselves laugh at the grasp of sirens. But me, I haven't dreamt an inch since disembroidering myself. weird city weepiness crowded with dusks and perfect silence. The foreground, this fever pitch, there's nothing that there and anywhere can be nothing by choice. I couldn't tell you if it means anything at all, to try my hardest to flatten, to accept erosion with supermarket smiling, to walk with you for ages. Now it is the quarter moon that hurtles me into the sun, that in my clumsiness I descend into your loudest chewing understatement and ask platitudes to better my luck. Displeasure, though, is a living thing, a rotation of thin pine combs that embosses the soul and glistens across the silver powder lining the lips. The future never happened here, despite the persuasion we'd call best effort. The future doesn't happen at Barclays Center or at 2nd Avenue shit-faced portals or goddamn Rivington Street, at least anymore. I'm struck by indecision's feet at the door of perception. I hold up a line wrangling my pockets for debt. I get older and more afraid of dying. Each point of a moment within this trailing market, I feel declawed, newfangled, moping. So what on the A train, black flag on the G, wearing a mask you can see the lattice of, like the screws that hold the Tiffany gems into place. And then the pigs stumble in at Utica Avenue and I lose my place in the poem. The light ups on the map, the same age of suffocation as the carbon that comprises glimmering new shrines and sigils of the lonely giggling. Now it's dark. Self-determination reeks of neutral hypoallergens, the thought of my own toughness belittled and slurpy stains streaming down my coat, trying to process all this heat of being underfoot, escaping for a chunk of manufactured air among untreated decay, this circle that is called upon in coffee numbers among dead harvests, that seldom even one toss of crumbled package among concrete trodden ferns, that enormous instantation of unkindly fog, that unkept swarm of distilled shivering at arrival in these Americas in concealment, in separate next times, in this infinite setback to fill the red sonic curfews with vomit and leave. Such a weather is to compress through teeth, the unexpected perdition, the ashes of lonesome things, woodland fauna from places I haven't even seen. That is why it's too cold for September. And that is why it's kind of too warm for March. Just saying. Thanks so much. That's it. That's all I got.
Wonderful.
Bravo.
Thank you.
Amazing.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Patrick.
That was great.
Very
That
good.
was so cool. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you to Matt and Dan for today as well. And thank you to Anna and everyone, of course, from Peter Freeman Gallery for their support in preparing for today's event. We'd also like to thank the Terra Foundation for sponsoring our NSE program and making these daily conversations possible, and for their support of our growing archive, which you can view on the Rails YouTube channel. Today's conversation will be up there shortly. For the past 22 years, the Brooklyn Rail has provided a platform for the arts, culture, and politics through our monthly publication and public events like our daily NSE. Please check the chat for a link to donate. And join us Monday at 1 p.m. for a conversation with Renee Gladman and Zoe Hopkins. And you can now turn on your microphones and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you all so much for being here today.
All right.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Thank you.
And
so much,
Matt,
everybody.
Patrick, amazing.
Great job, Dan.
Bye.
God bless.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Talk
Thank you,
to you
Matt.
soon.
Thank you, Rail.
Thanks all.
A good one.